Morning, all. Appreciate everybody coming out this morning. We're on page 22, finishing up section 1 of lesson 7. Thank you to Cody for his work on last Sunday, and Kyle for taking the reins on Wednesday, starting us on this lesson. I was able to catch that one, and some really good thoughts, and I appreciate all those thoughts and those comments. We're going to start on question 3 on page 22, and I'm going to start in Proverbs 21 and verse 20. And so if you, that's a verse that was discussed at length, I thought very well, and I also think it has some implications on question number 3 that I hope we have time to talk about. So we'll talk about questions 3 and 5 especially on page 22, and then we'll go over to section 2. Before we get into all that, we'll ask Jonathan if he would to say a word of prayer for us.
Heavenly Father God, we thank you for this day that lets you give to us. We're just mindful of all the things that you provided for us. You're the great provider. You're the creator of all things. All things belong to you. Everything that we have comes from you. We just ask that you would, with us, we come and go into this time of study, in particular the things that you've given us, our management of those things. We just ask that you would help us to properly focus at this time, to put away all other thoughts, and to focus upon you and your word, and what you would have us to do, your directives for us. And just please help us to align our will with your will, and just be with us in all things. Look out your sleep, right? Amen.
Amen. So the umbrella that I would put over all of this is, as we've talked about this entire class, is what we talked about at the very beginning of the quarter. If all things are God's, if we truly believe that, if we kind of wrap our minds around that and truly understand it, then every spending decision is a spiritual decision. And so that puts kind of an increased emphasis on, as we talk about spending, how are we spending God's money, and are we being thoughtful about that? And there was a lot of conversation on Wednesday, good conversation about how do you prioritize where to spend God's money. That's question 2. I think that's important for us all to think about. I don't think that we're going to thoroughly talk about all the implications of that question within the walls of this class, but I think that's a question that I would recommend for our conversations with your family, conversations with your spouse. How do we prioritize where to spend God's money? Matthew 6:32 was a verse reference I wanted to add to that section. There are some things that God knows we need, right? Your Heavenly Father knows you need them. That's in the context of Matthew 6, right? Where we're going to eat, what we're going to drink, where we're going to live, what we're going to wear. Your Heavenly Father knows that you need these things, right? Jesus makes that comment. And so how does God provide that those things that we need can be met? Well, He gives us His resources so that we can be provided with those things to eat and to drink and to wear and to live. So certainly we would, right? We don't have any problem with those kind of things, prioritizing those things with God's money. God's causes should be prioritized with God's money. So those kind of things to talk about. But one of the first question that I want to kind of delve into in this lesson is the one that Kyle left off on. It's question 3, the phrase "living with margin," and that may not be a phrase that perhaps you're that familiar with. It's kind of become a popular, kind of evangelical term about the way that we treat our things. And I think a good one. The phrase "living with margin." Is anybody familiar with that term? What does that term mean? Anybody heard that? Just me, huh? Huh?
Me too.
You too. So let's go. What's margin? Tell me. Let's start with the simple definition. What's margin?
Room at the perimeter.
around the edges, right? So if you remember when we actually wrote on notebook paper, you had the little line on the side, right? That was the margin, kept you writing too close to the edge. If you're creating a document on some kind of Word document or something on a computer, you have to choose your margins. Why are there margins on notebook paper or margins around printed text?
They're like boundary to keep you within.
Yeah, exactly, right? Is there a reason why your Bible doesn't have text all the way to the very edge of the page and the top of the page and the bottom? Like, there's a boundary, there's a border, there's a margin around each page. So we understand that concept of margin. And so what would light? Yes.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
It used to be, back in the old days, it was living within your means.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly the concept. With some margin. So what would life with margin? What does that mean? You can use this in a lot of different ways. We're talking about financially, but it's a term that's used in a lot of different ways. And it's a lot to do with what Karen said is within our means. I saw or heard it defined this way, which I think could be used, again, a lot of different contexts. The space between our load and our limit. What are we actually doing, and what's our 100% of our capacity? The space between our load and our limit is margin. And whether that is our schedule, how much time, what's our current load of our schedule versus our limit if we scheduled 100% of our day, what's our budget, our current spending versus the absolute limit if we spent every dollar that came in, whether that's our energy or that's our relationships. It can be used a lot of different ways, but the space between our load and our limit. It made me think of let me back up a minute. So in terms of what God gives us with possessions, that's what this class is about. What are the implications of that? If you said live with margin, what does that mean?
Well, that we're not at the limit.
Not at the limit, right? Is that our lives are organized, our financial lives are arranged, where the things that God has given us as income and the way that we choose to use those things in spending, that it's not designed to go all the way to the limit, right? That we leave some margin, right? And why would we do that?
Well, when I read that line myself, I thought of Ruth.
Had that note. There's a biblical example of this. Yeah. So that's a literal illustration of this idea. So talk through that. Boaz literally left margin, or the Israelites were literally told to leave margin in their fields. Boaz is an example of that. How did they do that?
So whenever they planted all the way to the edges, but whenever they harvested, they left the edges unharvested for others to come in who are in need and take of that.
Isn't that an interesting kind of visual, like mental illustration for us, that they planted all the way to the very edges of their property, but they didn't harvest all the way to the edges of their property. They left the margins, and specifically they left the margins for who? Others. Which others specifically does the Bible note? The foreigner, the poor, the widow, right? The orphan. So there was literal, for those landowners, there were margin left for others. So how does that apply to you? How does that apply to me?
I think not reaching our limit, but then also not overloading ourselves. So when we see margin, we don't just take on more load. It's one thing to have the limit and spend everything we have, but then it's another thing to have a margin and think, well, I can take on this, this, and this because I have the margin. We're not really comfortable with things that aren't allocated, and so just leaving a margin of this, when we have a personal need or a personal want, and we see this margin over here that we don't overload ourselves.
I think that goes back to the Proverbs 21:20.
Hey, come on.
So, I mean, because we talked on Wednesday night, like, the wise man has all of these things, but he knows how to take care of them. And like Kara's saying, he doesn't overload himself. He doesn't use it foolishly. He's just wise about it.
Yes.
Um,
And what does it say that the wise man has in his house specifically in Proverbs 21:20?
Precious treasure in the world.
Precious treasure in oil. What was oil was that like something you just looked at and had and stored up? And what was the purpose of having oil in that day?
It was multi-purpose. You light your house with it. You would meet visitors with it and give them refreshment, anoint it, put it on your head and your hands.
So this was a resource that it says the wise have in their house. Almost, I think in this context, you almost think about it as a little bit of margin of oil. The wise person keeps a little left over in their house. Why might they need it? Maybe there's an emergency. Maybe there's a visitor. Maybe there's a poor person who doesn't have enough oil for their cooking or their lamp or their, maybe they can bless somebody with it in an anointing. Like there's so many uses of oil, but notice that the wise person, is it the same verse that says what the foolish person does with their oil?
Swallow it.
Devours it, right? There is no margin. There is no set aside. There's no leftover. The foolish person devours every bit of their oil. The wise person has a reserve, has some marginal oil that they can help somebody else be ready for a time of emergency, be ready to bless somebody else. Anyway, I think that verse is, so I appreciate Brandy making that point. I think that verse is very applicable there. Thoughts about that? How do we practically do that? Any thoughts about that as you think about that concept in your own life? Living with margin. How do we manage that?
Maybe not how we do that, but I will say that I think that we get distracted by the margin more than just about anything else.
Tell me what you mean by that.
It's the extra. It's the excesses. I mean, everything in the middle is stuff we need to survive off of. And you pointed out in Matthew 6, the Lord knows what we need. He provides for that. And we tend to sometimes take that for granted. What's going to keep the lights on? But it's the extra that becomes the idol, becomes the mammon, becomes what we get distracted by.
Yeah.
We instead of looking for the uses for it, we look for, well, look at what I have, or how am I going to use that for me?
Correct.
That's the extra for me.
Yeah.
I got some more example about it.
Sure.
So I won't say by name, but I know specifically a person that years and years ago had this is financially, completely financially, but there was a salesman, a medical salesman, and they made their biggest money off selling these specialized pieces of equipment. They as most salesmen, they get paid a lower salary and they get made a lot off commission. And it was really kind of a risk reward in that job, and they had a great month. I mean, just a phenomenal month where they sold like five of these pieces of equipment, and this person lived kind of high anyway with food, but so instead of throwing it anywhere, whether it be investment savings or whatever, they went to a couple of fancy restaurants during that thing and said, we owe it to ourselves and then they still got to the edge of that limit again. So I'm not saying inherently that's ever bad, like to do it occasionally, to do that. I'm just saying that reminded me when y'all were just talking about where the word budget comes to mind. When I think of margin, it's...
No, it's exactly right. I was going to go to question 5. I think you're exactly right. I don't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. That's it.
Why is it that, and I do understand there's economic issues and inflation, so I'm going to set all that aside and understand that there are economic realities, and I'm not trying to demonize any of that. But why is it in general that as people in America, as our incomes grow, that our margin doesn't grow? Well, obviously our spending, we're like goldfish, we just grow to the size of the bowl we're in, right? Where our spending grows to the limit of our income. That is typically the way that we operate as Americans. It isn't that we just widen our margin. As Ron says, when we have that windfall, we widen our spending. And so there's not that margin. Question 5, is there a connection between stewardship? I might say, how is there a connection between margin and budgeting? Again, this is not a class on budgeting. But I think there is. Is there a mechanism, Kyle used this term last time, to build your own fence for your family, through prayer and conversation and study and being thoughtful about your own flocks, right? Proverbs 27:23, knowing the condition of your own flocks, knowing the condition of your own finances. How do you create a fence for yourself where you create margin? Anyway, I think that's something that we should be very, very thoughtful about. This is very simple advice that everybody probably has heard and already done, but it was kind of transformational for me and Tara. Was simple way to create margin is open the separate bank account and put all the charitable stuff in that account. That way it's literally separated. It's literally separated, and it's truly margin. It's and so all of the things that everybody can define this differently. This is just us, right? It's our fence. Everything we define as our charitable giving, not this, every week when we get paid, part of that goes over there, but then when the windfall stuff comes, it goes over there. You create some space where it's kind of out of the regular spending. It's out of sight. You created the margin. Done the same thing with savings. Not only the stuff that thinks about saving just on a weekly basis, but when the special things come along, you set it aside. You're intentional about creating margin. Anyway, I just think those things are important to think about. Otherwise, we tend to be goldfish. I'll start over here and I'll come back to you.
And I think I jotted this thought down too. Margin is relative.
Oh, for sure.
It's real easy. I think there's two areas we can run to. One is to look at other people's margin and say, look how much more that they're able to do with their extra than me. And I think of Ruth and Boaz, and if I've got a 10-acre field and I leave a row of corn all the way around it, the guy next to me's got a 500-acre field and he leaves a row of corn. We've both done the same thing.
Yes.
But his is going to look greater, but we've both done the exact same thing.
100%. And I would interrupt you just for a second. I think the widow's mite comes into play there. We got to remember that. And the Corinthians verse, when we compare ourselves among ourselves, we're not being wise, right? All we can do is be thoughtful with the things that we've been blessed with and handle that well. Okay, go ahead.
So just know where we are in our walks with the Lord and understanding how much, what's His and what's ours, and where we are just financially. Maybe we're starting out as a very young couple.
For sure.
We're retired. Our margins will look different through the years.
No question. No, that's an excellent point. And it's again, none of this is prescriptive that there should be a certain percentage and all of that has got to be study and thought and prayer and conversations with your families and all that kind of stuff. But the principle of maybe it's not the way your family does it, but how do you create margin?
Yeah, how do you prioritize spending? I wasn't here for that question, but you're talking about with, and obviously we don't say that out of any, look at us, we have it right. It was very, the best financial advice I've ever received was to do that. You set aside that margin first. And things changed in terms of your mindset and what you're able to do when you set that aside first. And so it's not about a percentage, but if you pray about it and you study about it and you talk to your spouse about it and you set a percentage, it helps because as your income grows, your margin will grow because the percentage gets bigger. And so just being very intentional, like you said, about having that you're hiding it from yourself so you're not tempted, but it's just there. You're sacrificing it at the front end so you're not scrambling. It's already out of your limit. It's already out of your load, and you can handle that load when there's a need, when a need comes along.
Yes.
Because you've done it on the front end. And so, and when you think about, like, we can't do what some people who taught us this information are able to do, but everybody can do something if you have that mindset of, like, when we get income, this much is going to set aside for needs of other people.
Yes. And the other thing that is going to be variable in this, Kyle said, the margins will get us in trouble because, we got our needs and then we got our margins. Defining what your needs are is also a relative, also, right? What is truly a need becomes again, don't think of a prescription there, but something we got to wrestle with.
Surprised that Dave Ramsey hasn't come up yet, that I've heard in our discussions. His budgeting app, I think, has a good concept behind it called Every Dollar. Not to plug that, but just the concept is every dollar has a purpose that you give and I think that's what we're describing. Whether you set it aside so you're not tempted by it, or you set it, you're saying this money already has a purpose, and that's the difference. I think for a lot of people is when it doesn't have a purpose, we just tend to find a purpose.
Yeah.
Whatever flashy that day or whatever it is that we desire, and so now it's got a purpose. But when we've already set it aside, say this has been purposed or set apart or consecrated or whatever we want to use.
Good word.
It is used. We're more likely to use it for that.
If it really is God's stuff, and it really is almost sacred, right? Like this is God's stuff. How can I not be haphazard or inconsistent or not thoughtful about how I'm using God's stuff? Yeah, I think there's value in that. Now I have seen budgets become an idol. Idols are nothing but good things elevated to positions they don't deserve. Budgets can become an idol where you are such a slave to the budget that you ignore the needs of somebody else or I have seen that too. So like anything else, it can be overdone. But I do think if we're serious about how we treat God's things, it will be part of how we think about that. Very valuable to our stewardship. Yes.
I think accountability is important, and because accountability is important, then relationships are important. And so when we think about how can we make sure every dollar has a purpose, how can we make sure we have margin and that margin has a purpose? Everybody says we don't talk about finance with friends, but I really think in order to do this well, you have to have friends who you can have these uncomfortable conversations with. I mean, it's uncomfortable between spouses sometimes, but you have to be able to have those conversations. But you also need friends who you can say, this is the lifestyle that, we've decided is our limit, and anything else we're going to set aside to give away or set aside to help the church or set aside to do whatever. And we need you to hold us accountable to that. If you see us start to lean into our margin to grow our own lifestyle, we need you to help us refocus. And we know people who have friends, we know people who are in groups like that. And that would be that's countercultural, right? To think about having that conversation with your friend, like, hey, I'm seeing that, do you really need that new thing? Because you said 10 years ago, this was the lifestyle that you wanted to maintain and you don't want to go outside that. Are you thinking about this? To think about having those conversations with our friends is uncomfortable, but I think to do this well, we have to find people that we have that kind of relationship with, and we can say, we would want them to say, you're off the path, and any other, you shouldn't be having lunch with that man by yourself. You know, you want somebody to say something like that, but when it comes to money, we're kind of hands off. And I think we need to be more hands on with each other. Not as a, you know, not a whole group of people, but you need to have somebody who you can have that conversation with.
Which all kind of goes back to, in my mind, as you're talking about that, you know, do we really think that how we spend our money is jeopardizing souls? I happen to think it is. And so, if you think that's true, and then that is it's incredibly important conversation.
Or it could, how, I was thinking of the oil that in Proverbs, like, oil is also used to anoint. And so, it's how we're spending our money, not just jeopardizing souls, but keeping us from saving souls. How could we convert others to the gospel
Good question.
by giving?
I think the concept that we're always faced with, and that we're going to be continued to face with, the world's going to bring to us, is exactly what Ron said, and it sticks in my mind. It said, well, you owe it to yourself, right? That's the phrase that Ron used about the gentleman that had the extra income come in. So, well, you know, you've done well here. You owe it to yourself to do this. That is 100% what the world is going to put in front of us. So how do we take that, and to Ron's point, not demonize it, but understand that that may not be the voice of the shepherd. It may be the voice of the stranger. How are we using God's resources?
I wrote down, that goes back on question 3. I wrote down this just personal question. Is my budget, I'm like a 6-8 budget.
Yep.
Is it just? Am I taking care of the right things? The things that need to be taken care of in my budget, are they taken care of? Is it faithful? Is it God-oriented? Is it focused in God's way? And is it humble? Is my budget about me? Is my budget about others?
Yep. And is it, when you say faithful, does it trust in God? There is there's a way to make it an idol where we put so much trust in ourselves. I've got all this figured out. Does it leave room for trusting God? All good thoughts, all good questions.
So how Ecclesiastes talks about, you know, enjoy the fruit of your labor.
Sure.
And so how do you balance that with a margin? Like, not become a slave to the budget to the point of you're just miserable all the time because nothing's enjoyable. But also have, like, how do you, is it just not putting that enjoy the fruit of your labor in the place of, like, I deserve this? Like, where you have some margin to enjoy the fruit of your labor, where does that become problematic, and how can we make sure we're not doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question that is not given a specific answer intentionally, in my judgment. I think that we're intended to wrestle with that.
I guess what I'm asking is, what are the red flags that we would be? Because it's like Ron said, there's a place for enjoying what you have. But what would be the red flags for? Because this is something I struggle with personally. Is like knowing the danger signs before you're in a mess. So what would be the red flags for? I'm not creating enough margin. I'm enjoying myself a little too much.
I don't know if this is a red flag, but I just remind us that at the end of all that discussion, what Solomon ends with is, you know, live this way, but keep in mind you're going to give an answer for it. You're going to stand before a judge. And I don't think that that's just hey, you can go do this, but you're going to pay for it later. I think that's make sure that there's a boundary on you're enjoying the life that God has given you. And if we will keep that in mind, then, you know, we're more like the 5 virgins who came to enjoy the wedding ceremony, and they used some of their extra oil to bring with it. They were keeping in mind, hey, there's going to be a day when all this is required of me, and I have to do something with it. But that doesn't mean I don't live right now. They're doing the very same things the other virgins are doing. They're sleeping and resting. They're not up wringing their hands and have had enough. They've been purposeful in planning for that. And I think maybe that's some of the the help to get us there, is just living with a mindset that yes, God has given me that which I can enjoy. And He's given it, Ecclesiastes, purposefully, that it would bring enjoyment to my life. But not at a loss of seeing Him for who He is as a holy and just God.
I think it's a good thought. Are we thoughtful about it would be one. I had another. Sorry, please.
No, I was just gonna say, it goes back to every spending decision is a spiritual decision. So I think if we're praying and being mindful and staying connected to God in that He will let us know, okay, you're maybe having a little too much fun, or maybe you need to do this. So I think that would be something I would lean into.
Yeah, I think that's very thoughtful. Do we notice that it's chasing the wind? That the enjoyment, the enjoy the fruit of your labor, that it continues to grow over time, that it's never enough, that we continue to chase it. That would be a red flag, I think. But I go back to a thought that I read recently in financial, but in a lot of things, is 85% of the decisions that we make in life, I don't know what the percentage is, 90% of the decisions that we make in life are not going to be book, chapter, and verse answers for them. It's wisdom. I think it's what Brandy just said. What is wisdom? Wisdom is application of God's principles to real life questions. And are we praying about it? Are we thoughtful about it? Do we have enough Bible knowledge in our background that we can draw on those principles to make decisions where the answer is not black and white? That's wisdom. There's so many decisions in life that are that way.
I want to add to her question. Why do these humans want to get near the boundary?
Good question.
I don't understand. I mean, I guess it happened since Adam and Eve. Like, you got this awesome boundary of the garden and had one thing you had to do to not drop outside of it.
Yes.
And you did that. And so like I said, same thing with sin, this financial God. So sometimes I think we treat the Bible like it's a boundary book.
Yes.
How close can I get to the edge of that book and still have a good, fun life and all, to me that I got to figure that question out to also help me figure out how we live inside this boundary.
I think that's a very good thought. It's thoughtful.
So then a pretty big red flag, just off of what Ron said, talking snake offers.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle, for that addition.
If I find it talking snake, I'm gonna have plenty of margin.
But in all seriousness, if it's not from God, if it's not purpose towards God, even if it's enjoying our life, we're gonna take the family out and see a movie. We're gonna go and have that nice meal at a nice restaurant. But if it's all about me, then that's probably the flag that needs to get my attention. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I love my family and we need a break. I love my family and we need some rest. But if it's I want, I deserve, I've earned, that's probably one of the bigger flags. It's more of the words of Satan than it is the words of God.
Good thought. Other thoughts?
I think we edge toward the boundary because things aren't black and white, but we like black and white. And so if the boundary's there, we like to hang out near it because that's where the black meets the white. So we know, like it's easy to draw a line and say I won't cross that line, but it's harder to say I don't want to get close to that line. I don't want to look at that line because we like when you said it's not black and white, like there's not a book, chapter, and verse. That's hard for me. I'm like, give me my list and I'll do my list and I'll be happy. But these things are not, it's hard to do that.
Which is not terrible to draw your own fence, right? That's back to Kyle's point. You have the wisdom to do that. Good thought.
Again, I think we need each other for being able to do that.
So it's one thing to kind of stay within our boundaries, right? To stay within our margin. If you go over to page 23, debt is essentially not only not leaving the margin, but it's going outside the fence, right? That is not just spending our margins, our current income, but debt is essentially just spending our future income, spending it now and paying for it later. So, what does the Bible have to say about that? We won't finish this. We won't finish this section this morning. We'll continue this on to Wednesday, which is fine. But the Bible does. Again, one thing a question that I don't know that I've fully answered, but I would put it to you right now, and we'll talk about it on Wednesday, is why does the Bible care about debt as much as it does? That seems to be a strictly economic and financial question, and yet the Bible puts it in spiritual terms. That's just a thought question. Why does God care about this? Is one that we should. I'm going to think about, and I'd ask you to think about it. Okay, let's read some of these verses. And again, I'm just going to go around the room, if you don't mind, and just kind of read these, and we'll talk about them as a group, if that's okay. Jonathan, do you mind to get Proverbs 22:7? Brandy, do you mind? And I'll go ahead and you can do 26 and 27, the same verse also. Brandy, Proverbs 11:15. Tara, Psalm 112 and verse 5. Ron, Proverbs 17:18. Morgan, if you don't mind, Romans 13, verse 8. Holly, Psalm 37, 21 and 22. Kyle, Proverbs 6, 1 through 5. And Jackson, Deuteronomy 28. You'll be ready for those verses. So we'll just knock our way through these. And I like Kyle's from last class, kind of how do we put these in our own words? What's the Bible writer trying to get across to us? So we'll start in Proverbs 22. Jonathan.
The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender.
The borrower is servant to the lender. So that's kind of germane to what we're talking about this morning. Okay, and then verses 26 and 27.
Do not be one of those who shakes hands in a pledge, one of those whose surety is for debts. For if you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take away your bed from under you?
So let's talk about that one for a minute. We're going to keep in mind the thought of the borrower is slave to the lender. We'll talk a little bit about what that means. The borrower is slave to the lender. Why is that a problem? But then in the second verse that Jonathan referenced, don't put up security for debts, because if you cannot pay, why should your bed be taken from you? What is that talking about specifically? What does that have? How did the bed get involved here?
You jeopardize what you already have as collateral for something that you can't afford.
Yeah, collateral is a good word. That's probably the word that we would be familiar with in our modern kind of financial transactions. Security. Again, if this is our own debt, we might think about collateral for our debts. Be very thoughtful about putting up collateral for debts, because if you cannot pay, why should your bed, why should your house, why should your car, why should your savings be taken from you? Those are good thoughts. Holly, you got a verse to read. Brandy.
Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands and pledge is secure.
Putting up security for a stranger, the Bible is very stringent about, very serious about. What is that? Talk to me about that concept. Put up security for a stranger. What does that mean? You're co-signing, basically. That's exactly what we would call it. You're co-signing. What does it mean to co-sign, Thomas?
If they don't pay, you got to.
You are holding yourself responsible for the debt of someone else, right? That's essentially what this is. Brandy, do you mind to read your verse one more time?
Sure. Whoever puts up security for a stranger will surely suffer harm, but he who hates striking hands and pledge is secure.
So that word stranger, I don't know that we would have a great deal of trouble not co-signing for an absolute stranger. I don't know how often that opportunity is facing us. But Proverbs 6, other places talk about any time that we are holding ourselves responsible for someone else's debt, we should be very, very cautious. In fact, I'm going to skip there if you don't mind. Kyle, do you mind to read Proverbs 6, 1 through 5?
My son, if you become a surety for your neighbor,
And this is a neighbor, right? This is not like some rando that just walked down the street. Will you co-sign on my used car? This is a neighbor. Remember what that word means to an Israelite. Okay.
have given a pledge for a stranger. If you have been snared with the words of your mouth, if you have been caught with the words of your mouth, do this then, my son, and deliver yourself. Since you have come into the hand of your neighbor, you'll humble yourself and not importune your neighbor. You'll humble yourself and importune your neighbor. Give no sleep to your eyes, no slumber to your eyelids. Deliver yourself like a gazelle from the hunter's hand, and like a bird from the hand of the fowler.
So how important does the proverb writer say it is to get out of that situation where you have co-signed for your neighbor? He says, don't sleep. Don't let your eyelids close in that situation. That's fairly strong language. Again, we'll talk on Wednesday. Why do we think that is? Why is the Bible so? Why does it use that kind of language about putting up security for a stranger? Okay, Tara, Psalm 112.
It is well with the man who deals generously and lends, who conducts his affairs with justice.
So with all the things the Bible talks about debt, it does say here, it is well for the man who gives generously and lends. I'm just going to put a note by that and talk about what does that mean. Okay? Ron? Proverbs 17, 18.
A man lacking in sense pledges and becomes guarantor in the presence of his neighbor.
A man lacking sense puts up a pledge, co-signs for his neighbor. Okay? Morgan, Romans 13. Do you mind to read? I think it's 7. I'm going to turn there myself. Let me add a verse to this one. Romans 13. Yeah, let's read 7 and 8 if you don't mind.
Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law.
It's almost a proverb stuck in the book of Romans a little bit. Owe no one anything except to love one another. Okay. Kyle, proxy for Holly.
The wicked borrows and does not pay back, but the righteous is gracious and gives. For those blessed by him will inherit the land, and those cursed by him will be cut off.
So here's what this is the verse maybe that you might expect the Bible to say about debt. Can you read that one more time, Kyle?
The wicked borrows and does not pay back.
You would kind of expect that part, right? The wicked borrows and does not pay back. So that's specifically, that's almost an honesty, being true to your word, doing what you're going to do, say what you're going to do, right? The wicked borrows and does not pay back. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So good verse to keep in mind. And then as, in the book of Deuteronomy, at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses gives the blessings from Mount Ebal and the cursings from Gerizim. Okay, real quick before we leave, in Proverbs 28, verse 12, here's one of the blessings. Yes, what did I say? Sorry, Deuteronomy 28, 12.
The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow.
You will lend to many nations and not borrow if you're blessed. But if you're cursed, verses 43 and 44.
The sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail.
If you're blessed, you're going to be the lender. If you're cursed, you're going to be the borrower. That is from Deuteronomy 28. So, got the verses kind of read in our minds. We'll talk about the questions from section 2 And I think that's probably all we'll get to. We may read some verses from Lesson 8, but we'll do the questions from Section 2 next time. Thanks, everybody, for your thoughts and attention this morning.